Michael Jordan is not only the best basketball player, but he's the most exciting basketball player to ever play.
Tatum fires away, pumps it in, 51 for Jason Tatum.
The Big Three NBA podcast is powered by Prize Picks, the exclusive daily fantasy partner of the CLNS Media Network. Welcome to another edition of the Big Three NBA podcast. I am Sherrod Blakely, joined by the one and only Ethan Sands of the Cleveland Plain Dealer. How you doing, Ethan?
I'm doing great. So happy to be here, Sherrod. I appreciate you having me on.
Not a problem. I mean, just like folks aren't really familiar with this Cavs team that's been balling out all season, they don't necessarily know Ethan Sands, but just like the Cavs that you cover, they're going to get to know you a lot better in the coming weeks and months for sure. Ethan, we're just going to actually, before we get too deep into the conversation, just want to give a quick shout out to our partners here at CLNS Media Network. I want to first shout out our folks at Prize Picks, the exclusive daily fantasy partner of the CLNS Media Network, as well as our good friends at Game Time, which is, again, they've got you covered when it comes to great ticket prices on all your sporting events as well as concerts. We'll talk a little bit more about that later, but we are going to pivot and transition into what we're really here to talk about, which is the Cleveland Cavaliers. Now, when you talk about this team, they've got the best record in the East, and that was something that, the Celtics, to their credit, were trying to close that gap a little bit, but Cleveland is obviously going to be the top seed. Ethan, how important was it for Cleveland to hold on to that number one seed when they've been at the top of the East pretty much all season?
I think it was, in two parts, extremely important because of home court advantage, because they understood that last season in the first round, it took them 7 games to get past an Orlando Magic team. And there have been people around the locker room who have said that they don't believe that they come back into that game because they were having a large deficit in that contest before coming back and roaring back behind the Cleveland Cavalier crowd. So it makes a difference. Also knowing the Cavs' home court record is what it is this season, it's only telling to how important that advantage is for them. But in the second part, it's also just, it was closing out the regular season on a higher note. Right, because we understand that the Cavs over the last month or so had not been playing their best basketball, had been wanting to get that number one seed, knocked out by the game against Sacramento a couple games ago, but they weren't able to do it. So they had to do it against the Chicago Bulls. Obviously, Chicago was very much undermanned in that contest because they were waiting to play against Miami the next game for their own play-in stipulations and all those things. So for the Cavs, it is important for home court advantage because now they know that even if they do make it to the Eastern Conference Finals, that Boston will have to come to Cleveland and take that away from them if they do get them to a 7-game series.
Mm-hmm. And when you talk about home court advantage and having that top seed, one of the many perks that come with having the best overall record is that you are going to play a team from the play-in portion of the postseason. And that, you look at the teams that are going to be in the mix. You're talking about the Orlando Magic, the Atlanta Hawks, Chicago Bulls, who they recently defeated, as well as the Miami Heat. And having covered the Cavs this year, of those 4 teams, who do you think is the ideal matchup for Cleveland to face in order to just move on from that round as quick as possible?
I think it would be the Atlanta Hawks, as surprising as that may be. Because
you have to explain yourself on that one, young fella. Why the Hawks?
Even though they do have Trae Young, I think the Cavs understood that they traded away 2 very valuable pieces to them internally to get DeAndre Hunter earlier this season. They traded away Karis LeVert and Georges Niang, but it was in part because they knew that there was only a level that those 2 guys could get to in the playoffs that they had readily seen over the last few years, and they had aspirations to go further. So especially when you talk about an Atlanta Hawks team with Trae Young, but they do not have Jalen Johnson for the remainder of the season, and you look across and you see 2 guys that you are very familiar with, it allows you to have a better plan going forward. And Clint Capella going up against Jarrett Allen, Evan Mobley. It's going to be a tough competition when you look across for them, even though the Atlanta Hawks are the only team, or only one of 4 teams, to have beaten the Cavs twice this far into the season, or more than once. It shows that this is not the same Atlanta Hawks team that the Cavs faced earlier into the season when it comes to injuries, when it comes to reps, when it comes to how every single player has been built into their roster. And of course, Dyson Daniels is going to be a problem for one of the 2 guards, but when you look across, Trae Young is not the defensive caliber that we know him to be as of late. And we know that the Cavs, one of their guards will be able to step up into the limelight, even though I think we'll have to look and see if Darius Garland is up to the task for that this season.
Yeah, you mentioned the Atlanta Hawks. When I look at those 4 teams, that makes a lot of sense. The Hawks do. But I just, for me, I look at a team like Orlando that for the life of sanity cannot score the ball. I mean, the Celtics, they played the Celtics the other night and they won by 20, and folks are like, yay, great job. But the Celtics sat like their top 6 players. And even against a depleted Celtics team where there really weren't any top tier elite defenders per se playing major minutes, at least they could only score 96 points against them. I just think Orlando's one of those teams that if you're playing them, whether it's Boston, whether it's Cleveland, if you have the ability to knock down shots, and again, they're a very good defensive team, but you don't even have to have a great game in this league to score 100 points. And if you score 100 points against them, they're not going to beat you. And so I see where you're coming from with the Hawks. I would probably pick, Orlando Magic just because they're so just depleted from an offensive scoring standpoint. Now, one player that you did, or that I thought of when you were talking about the Hawks, is Mr. Hunter. And what kind of impact has he had, and what kind of impact do the Cavs anticipate him having once we get into the postseason?
He's still getting acclimated, right? And that's the most important thing. Kenny Atkinson has talked about it at length since they acquired him ahead of the trade deadline. The importance of DeAndre was he is known as a defensive player, as a guy who is 6'8", has a 7-foot wingspan, can guard probably about 1 through 4 or even 1 through 5 in certain scenarios. I think it's important to note that his defensive game is what attracted him to the Cleveland Cavaliers. And then you put on top of that the bonus that he can create for himself. He can just generally shoot over the defender in front of him. And there haven't been enough times this season where Kenny Atkinson has implemented an offensive set for DeAndre Hunter in his set alone, but they're working towards that, especially in the latter half of the season, to get him comfortable with ATOs, with the ball in his hands and all these things, because there have been times where even with the core 4 members of the Cleveland Cavaliers, Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell, Evan Mobley, and Jarrett Allen, where DeAndre will be on the floor and those 4 guys will spread out and allow DeAndre to do his work rather than actually running actions and schemes for him. That's just how good of an offensive player he has been. And obviously we saw the Cavs, as soon as he got on the team, run off a 12-game, 16-game winning streak as well. So I think that is only a viability as to how great he's been when he's on the Cleveland Cavaliers, and also how they can hope for him to succeed in the playoffs.
Yeah, if the Cavs have the deep playoff run that I think they're built to have, he's going to be a big factor in that. I was, like a lot of people in the NBA, shocked when they were able to get him and not have to really significantly disrupt their core group in order to make that happen. So he definitely one of the, I think one of the better in-season pickups that we saw. And when you talk about just success and just the way the Cavs have been winning, you got to talk about Spider, Donovan Mitchell. He's obviously having a great season. Was an all-star earlier. Is probably going to be on one of those one of the all-NBA teams. But he had an ankle injury recently. I think he missed maybe 1 game with that. What's the latest on Donovan Mitchell and his health?
It's being described as a mild ankle injury, right? But likelihood is, as we know, that the Cavs want to be extremely cautious going into the postseason, especially after last year, where they weren't healthy for the entirety of the playoffs. They want to have all of their roster eligible players available to them, and Donovan Mitchell is the biggest one. When we talk about what we saw when he got injured and was writhing on the ground in pain, it sent alarm bells off to the Cavs team. Hey, now, we're getting really close to the playoffs. We have to be careful with the guys that we need to be on the floor for us to make the run that we need. And Donovan Mitchell is at the pinnacle of that, even though Evan Mobley and Darius Garland will likely have the most eyes on them this playoffs. I think Donovan Mitchell is going to pull them along to the caliber that they want them to be. So I would not be surprised if Donovan Mitchell does not play for the remainder of the regular season. He's already listed as out for the Indiana Pacers game tonight against for the Cleveland Cavaliers. He did not play in the last game against the Chicago Bulls when they clinch number 1 seed. So I would not be surprised with 2 games left after tonight if he does not play for the remainder of the regular season, gets rest, and the Cavs go ahead and do some in-game work when it comes to practice so he can not be rusty and still have the rest that he needs to be at his top form.
Yeah, because, I mean, the thing about Donovan and folks around Celticsville, they know this all too well. He gets buckets, and there are a few teams in the NBA that he doesn't seem to, light up like a kid with a brand new pitcher of Kool-Aid back in the day. Like when he sees the Celtics green, I mean, it's almost like triggers his green light to go get buckets. So definitely, he's the guy that if he's healthy, this Cavaliers team is extremely, extremely difficult to beat. You touched a little bit on, earlier on just. Last season and just not being healthy. Obviously, the season didn't end the way the Cavs would have wanted it to. How much of a motivating factor do you think how things ended last season was for this group this year?
I think it's big, right? Because you when we're in the locker room after those games, when we're in the locker room and after the season, just being able to talk to these guys, there was a lot of what if. Right? What if we were healthy? What if, like, we took them 5 games, we took a game from them and their home court? What if we have Jarrett Allen? What if we don't have to wait to have Dean Wade till game 3? What if? And it's all centered around health, right? It wasn't like, oh, we felt like we were outmatched. It felt like they were undermanned. And I think that's the biggest thing when it comes to this Cleveland Cavaliers team, especially against Boston. And to be very fair to everybody in that organization, whether they want to admit it or not, they have done a lot of the things that they've done over the last few years, especially this season going to get DeAndre Hunter, continuing to add some wings in the buyout market to combat the Boston Celtics. They understand that their pathway, even though the Boston Celtics have to come to Cleveland to win the series, they know that Boston is their biggest competitor to get to the NBA Finals in the Eastern Conference, and they are going to do everything in their power to make sure that they have the best foot going forward to do that. So that's why I also say an Atlanta Hawks series might be better for the Cavs in that first round because they're not as physical as the Orlando Magic. You don't get as much wear and tear on the body when you're facing the Atlanta Hawks, who are going to dribble around you and try and get into your paint, but go to floaters rather than jabbing you in your side. So I definitely think this team is curated to try and go up against and challenge the Boston Celtics, and that's been the main goal as of late and as of this season.
Yeah, and Cleveland also, in addition to Donovan and some of those guys we're talking about, they also have a two-headed monster in Jarrett Allen and Evan Mobley. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about Mobley only because he was the one guy that really seemed to emerge this year, not just being a pretty good player that can help you win some games, but he emerged as an all-star. And I think it's very fair to say that he's on the short list of folks who may wind up on one of those all-NBA teams, especially when you look at guys like Joel Embiid and others who won't be on, who aren't eligible to be on the team. 18.6 points, I think 9+ rebounds, 3 dimes a game. When you look at where he's at now, what do you think has been his biggest areas of growth from where he was maybe a year ago?
The 3-point shot, clear cut, right? I mean, this season alone, he's had 13 games where he's made 3 or more triples in a game, in a contest alone, right? Before in his career, before the season, he had one of those such games where he made 3 3-pointers, right? So to have that level of growth, to have that level of stipulation, to go forward and take your game to the next level is huge when you talk about how this league is built around the 3-point shot and spacing and spreading the floor, and now allows Jarrett Allen to man the dunker spot, but it also gives Evan Mobley space to create on his own. And then you talk about the big-on-big action, which allows them to set up offense through those two guys, with Jarrett Allen being the offensive hub and Evan Mobley curating offense and figuring out where he wants to be on the floor depending on his matchup. So I think the 3-ball for Evan Mobley has elevated his offense to a different level, but it's also created offense for the players around him because now opposing big men are on the perimeter and closing out on Evan Mobley, which gives Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland, Jarrett Allen, Max Strus, whoever you want to name, more space on the floor to create for themselves as well. And it's just, the overall game of his, when it comes to his ball handling, when it comes to his aggressiveness, I think the aggressiveness is the second one for that, because the aggressiveness has allowed him to do these things. He's not shying away from these shots. He's not shying away from matchups. He's going into the chest of bigger opponents, and he's successing in those. He's achieving and he's enjoying the matchups rather than looking into the paint and being like, I want to take the best shot possible, because that was his biggest deter. He wanted to make the perfect play. Now he's just trying to make the great play or the good play. And that has allowed him open up more things for himself and get to this level, which is Defensive Player of the Year candidate, All NBA candidate, and he's already been listed as an All-Star.
Yeah, and it also shows his growth and maturity as a player to recognize, areas where he needs to improve his game and take the necessary steps to do that. And the result is what we're seeing on a night in, night out basis. And that's him being among the best players out there doing really amazing things and giving this Cavs team hope that they can do something that we have not seen in the post-LeBron era. And that is be one of the top-tier teams in the NBA and be, a team that is a title contender, not just on paper, but an actual, living, breathing, legitimate title contender. So there's certainly a lot of things that I think Cavaliers fans have to be excited about. And certainly for those of us who cover the Boston Celtics and watch them play, that's the series that we want, because that's the one team in the Eastern Conference that if you go from top to bottom, you say who's the biggest threat to dethroning the Celtics as the champions. You go no further than look at the Cleveland Cavaliers. Ethan, before we go any further, I want to give another shout out to our good friends at Prize Picks. Springtime is here and baseball season is definitely underway, something I know you love a lot. Don't miss your chance to add your favorite players from the diamond in your Prize Picks lineup, whether it's strikeouts, RBIs, or first inning runs. Take your pick, or more or less, for your shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash today. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in rewarded winnings, Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash. Run your game all season long on Prize Picks, which is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app. And it is the best place to win cash while watching your favorite players. And how you want to get in is real simple. You just download the app today and use code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, that's use the code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. And I tell you who's been running mad game for the Cavs, and it seems it's kind of what he does wherever he's at, and that's the head coach, Kenny Atkinson. I just remember when he was in Brooklyn, that was a game that you looked on the schedule and you're like, we're probably going to win this game, but we will not leave this game unscathed. They play hard, they play grimy, they're gritty, and you see remnants of that with this Cavaliers team, only he's got a much more talented cast of players to work with. Ethan, what do you see Kenny does best when you look at the things that he's done to help position Cleveland to be where they are now heading into the playoffs?
Managing his players, right? We've seen him be able to manage players and take everything that he's learned and all the stops along the way, whether that was Brooklyn, whether that was the Clippers with Ty Lue, whether that was in Golden State with Steve Kerr, right? Learning how to manage different players, how to use his player development background to embrace and empower all of his players in the lineup. And then also just being overly prepared and analytically based, being able to use the data that is given to him, not only from his assistant coaches, but also sports scientists and also in the health department when it comes to this team and how they're able to utilize a plan that they have had it set in place since before the season started. Kenny Atkinson, when he got here this summer, was also coaching the French national team. He was in France, but he made time to come back to Cleveland for his press conference, then flew out to LA to see Donovan Mitchell and Evan Mobley, flew out to Nashville to go see Darius Garland, and then flew to Donovan Mitchell again, but this time in Connecticut to have more of a sit-down meeting and to get a better understanding of every single player on this roster. And when you talk about how he's been able to envelop and empower every single player, it comes down to how he's been able to just discuss and build relationships with everybody on his roster because of how he's seen the game from afar as an assistant coach, as a head coach. And that delves into the season itself, because now you see guys feeling like they're playing freer than they ever have. Playing freer than they ever have in the NBA in their careers. And that has allowed multiple players on this roster to have career years, even if they haven't had career years maybe in shooting, in scoring. Maybe it's a better defensive rating than they've ever had. Maybe it's a better turnover ratio than they've ever had. But there's been guys that have shown themselves in ways that a lot of people around the NBA are like, I didn't know if I was going to expect that from this guy this year. And yet, here we are, the Cavs are 63-16, top of the Eastern Conference, and they get to rest and chill for the rest of the regular season before they get to the playoffs and see where they're headed and how Kenny Atkinson is going to plan out playoff adjustments and playoff sets now, rather than waiting to get to those situations and having to react rather than having a set plan like he likes to have.
Yeah, and there's a lot that, and Kenny, he first came on my radar back when he was an assistant with the Atlanta Hawks, and that's when Al Horford was there, and he was the guy that worked with Al on becoming more of a perimeter threat. And Kenny has talked to us many times about how Al wasn't exactly embracing the three-point shot when Kenny was working on him expanding his game. But, since then, Al will be the first to tell you that his career has been extended in many ways because of his ability to shoot the three-point shot and shoot it at a relatively high clip, usually in the low 30s, early 40s percentage-wise. And so the question you mentioned earlier about just how, Mobley has become a little bit more perimeter-oriented, playing more face to the basket type basketball. But you're seeing that happen, and he's still, in many instances, on the floor with Jarrett Allen. How have those two been able to be so effective? Because we see teams kind of tinker with the double big lineup, but you don't really see teams go all in the way Cleveland has with their two bigs and make that more of a staple of what they do and not just kind of a wrinkle of sorts.
Yeah, I mean, I think Evan Mobley is being described more as a wing now than as a big man, right? He's stretching the floor, and that allows spacing for Jarrett Allen. But on the defensive end, we already knew what these guys are. It's a help defender that's 7 feet tall with the wingspan to touch the back of the backboard if you really wanted to. So I definitely think when you talk about the defensive end, there was really no question about it, because Evan Mobley can guard 1 through 5 if needed. And sure, there are guards in certain situations that can attack him with their agility and acceleration, but he has the closeout speed and the reactive speed to get back and go on the glass to get those things. And then you have Jarrett Allen guarding up against some of the bigger centers around the league, and Evan Mobley being able to have the help defense on that area. So for those two pairing, it was more so on the offensive end and figuring out how to use them. And it's been more so having the ball in their hands rather than them being off the ball, right? As I mentioned earlier, Jarrett Allen being the offensive hub at the high post, at the midsection, and being able to figure out where he wants to go with the ball. Is he going to run a DHO with Max Strus? Is he going to go and run a screen drill with Darius Garland? Or is he going to go to a lob with Evan Mobley with a screen-on-screen action for them? It's an interesting dynamic that has continuously been curated through Kenny Atkinson's system. And that was one of the biggest things when he came in, and he talked about this in his introductory press conference, was basically, how do we get these two to work? How do we get these two to play together? And the other thing is also Evan Mobley has played on the floor a majority of his minutes this season, or not majority, but many of his minutes this season without Allen on the floor as well, because Jarrett Allen had a relationship with Kenny Atkinson dating back to Brooklyn when he was a rookie. And you built this relationship, and you're like, hey, I'm going to give you your time to shine. I'm going to give you your moments. But there are going to be times where you're not going to close fourth quarters because we need to space the floor, because we need more of an offensive set. We need DeAndre Hunter at the floor rather than you and Evan running that floor, right? So I think it's the relationship building, and this is the portion of Kenny Atkinson and how he has helped them be their best selves. And the offensive sets have been extremely different from last year. There's more body movement and ball movement rather than just stagnation. So I definitely think Kenny Atkinson has figured out the secret sauce when it comes to getting those two big men to work together in the offense, and already having two premier rim protectors on the defensive end. Those two things go hand in hand, and now you have other teams trying to figure out how they can counter that with two bigs of their own.
Yeah, and when you talk about like secret sauce, a guy that I think has tapped into that and then some this year for Cleveland has been Jerome. Guy was drafted by the Celtics, never set foot in Boston as a player. They traded him right away in draft nights. He's got a different kind of swag that I think catches people off guard. What do his teammates say about his confidence? Because his confidence seems to be super high, even before he kind of blew up a little bit this year and started doing some really positive things. His confidence seemed to be on a slightly above average, to say the least.
Yeah, I mean, it was dating back to last year when Ty played in just 2 regular season games, and everybody was like, "Well, we don't have Ty," my ears would perk up when they would say that. I'm like, "Wait, he hasn't played in 2 games. Is he really that valuable? Is he really that good?" Because remember, last year was my first year on the beat, and we come into this year, and he's played more games than he has in his entire career, right, in a regular season. And we talk about a guy that is now statistically having one of the best shooting years in NBA history, not just in this year, right? He's a guy who's under 6'5", averaging 12 points per game on 60% effective field goal percentage. There's just 10 players in NBA history to have done that at his size, right? So he's on the cusp, on track to be the 11th player to do so. And I think that's a testament to his game. But when you talk about swagger, when you talk about how he's been able to just go at defenders, he talks a lot of trash, right? It is irrational confidence. It is delusional confidence at times where he's going up against some of the best players in the league. We saw him talking trash with Paolo Banchero, who's on the cusp of being the next face of the NBA, particularly, right? Potentially, right? And I think when you see him doing that, when you see him being able to hit shots from beyond the arc, you get to him having the balance that he has and getting into the lane and using his slow step to throw defenders off balance. I just think he has almost everything in his bag to be able to have success in this league. And it's crazy to me that because of the new CBA and how he hasn't played 65 games with 20 minutes or more, he's not even eligible for the most improved player award this season. He's in the running for Sixth Man of the Year, but I think it's more of a race between DeAndre Hunter and Peyton Pritchard, even if Ty Jerome is having statistically one of the best years as a guard in NBA history, right? Yeah. So I definitely think this guy has swagger. He has a lot of gall when it comes to playing in this league, and he might play himself out of a contract with the Cavs next year because his contract is expiring when it comes to summertime.
Yeah, I think his situation may be similar to what the Knicks went through with Isaiah Hartenstein, where he wanted to come back to New York wanted him to come back, but the price point that he was, frankly, his market value was significantly higher. And, you with Sam Presti coming in with all that cash and all them picks, he gonna get his man. He is going to get his man. And it's interesting just looking at Ty Jerome and just what he's been able to do, because to me, he's another one of those guys that certain stars aligned a certain way that allowed him an opportunity to show what he can do. And sometimes it just works that way. Sometimes it's not necessarily about what you can do, but what your potential says you might be able to do in the near future. And certainly when you talk about, Ty Jerome, you're talking about a guy that absolutely oozes confidence in every sense of the word. Before we go any further, wanted to give a shout out to another one of our good friends of the program, and that is the good folks at Game Time. Listen here, people. Game Time is exactly where you want to go when you're looking for great ticket prices to sporting events as well as concerts. It's certainly a place that I have frequented a number of times. And if the playoffs play out how we think they will, and Boston and Cleveland are the last team standings, you are going to want to get those tickets through Game Time. Because if you try to go traditional methods, it's going to be what we like to call pricey. So keep that in mind. And again, the first place I go when I'm looking to get some, good prices on some tickets. And beyond that, the thing that makes Game Time, I think, really, really cool is that they have all in pricing. So that shows up the total price shows up before you actually get to the checkout. And so you also get panoramic views also before you get to checkout. And because again, once you're ready to check out, you're going to know exactly where you're sitting. You're going to know what your sight line is. And maybe most important, your wallet ain't going to take as big a hit as it would if you did something else. So if you want in, all you have to do is download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's download the app, Create an account and use the code CLNS for $20 off. Terms apply. What time is it? Game time. And it is also time for us to talk a little bit more about the Green Teamers, the Boston Celtics. This year against the Cavs, they split it 2-2. The winning margin, which I thought was interesting, was no more than 7 points. So every time these two played, even though during the game the score may have seemed a little bit lopsided at some point, at the end of the day, every time they played, it pretty much came down to the last few minutes to decide the winner. And again, with them being the top two seeds, the expectation is that they will meet in the conference finals. And Ethan, since this is your first time on the show, we're going to play a little game that we like to call Fill the Lane. And it's very, very simple. I will begin a sentence and you will finish it, i.e. fill the lane with a word or a phrase or a couple of words. And here's what I got for you, Ethan. Cleveland will send Boston home for the summer if what?
Darius Garland can average 20 points in that series.
Ooh, yes. Tell me more.
I think Darius Garland is the biggest key for that series alone because Evan Mobley, it feels like, had a breakout in that series last year in the Eastern Conference semifinals. That's when everybody around the league was like, oh, okay, Evan, game 5, it doesn't matter that Donovan Mitchell's not on the floor. You got your buckets. Cool. We love to see it. But Darius Garland, where are you? Why have you stifled? Why are you not getting to where you are? And especially in a year where Darius Garland has been named an all-star, has gotten back to his form. He also is not dealing with a fractured jaw caused by Kristaps Porzingis himself. I think this is the year where Darius Garland needs to have a breakout in the playoffs. And if it were to come against the Boston Celtics, I think everybody else feels in around him because that would mean that either Derek White or Drew Holiday isn't causing him as enough problems as we've seen in the past, allowing Donovan Mitchell, Evan Mobley, Max Strus, Ty Jerome, you name it, these guys to get off the ball and allow them to get more space. Or Darius Garland is just taking his man and finding a way to the basket or creating his own shot from beyond the perimeter. I think Darius Garland is the guy to watch in that series because he's a smaller guard, because he's been hounded by Derek White and Drew Holiday in the past. This is a series where Darius Garland will be the X factor to prove that he is not just a regular season player.
Yeah, and that the weird thing to me is that I will watch Darius Garland play against other teams, and he's because of just physics, he's going to be facing more times than not guys who are bigger than him, and yet I've seen him consistently be able to not let that be a deterrent from him having a good game or making an impact. And yet for some reason, when the Celtics, get on the floor with him, things change for him in a bad way. What do you think it is about the Celtics that they have been able to pretty consistently not allow him to have those games? He's had I think the last game they played, he went off a little bit, but for the most part, they've really been able to keep him from having big games. Why do you think they, more than maybe any other team, have been able to make his life a living hell?
Drew and Derek, they're pests, man. They guard 94 feet. They're physical. They're up in you the entire time, and it's draining. Right? It is draining to have to do that and then come back on the defensive end. And Darius is the first person that Boston is looking for to attack. They're looking to put him into actions. They're looking to get into his body. They're looking to find ways to get him in motion so that he cannot expend enough energy on the offensive end. He's getting overly worked on the defensive end. So I think that is the main portion. And Darius this season has taken it very personally and gotten into the weight room and gotten his weight up, his strength up in preparation. As I said at the beginning of this podcast, everything has been in preparation for facing Boston and yet again in the playoffs, this time in a bigger setting and the Eastern Conference Finals where they two would meet if fate does allow it. But if Darius Garland can be a deterrent on the defensive end, if he can wall up, if he can stand his ground, if he can do all these things on the defensive end, then I think that'll pick up to offense. Because Sherrod, as you know, as better than anybody, defense leads to offense, and that can lead to wins. Because we know that defense wins championships, but against the Boston Celtics, you got to get buckets too. And especially when we talk about this team that is averaging almost 53-point attempts per game in the Boston Celtics, you have to make threes against them because they're just simply going to get them up.
Yeah, and you know going in. I mean, make sure you lace your sneakers up because you're gonna be running. If you have any hopes of winning, you will be running to get back in transitions and not give them those easy walk into type threes. Now, the thing about the Celtics, and it's been the never ending narrative, no matter what they do, even when they win a damn title, people still want to talk about Jalen, Jason. Can they play it well together, even though they've won a chip? Here's what that is not my question to you. My question to you is this: when you look at the Cavs, you look at the Celtics, who is the player that is more of a problem for Cleveland? Is it Jalen or Jason?
I think it's Jalen, to be honest, because I think the Cavs have multiple defenders that enjoy guarding Jason Tatum, DeAndre Hunter, Dean Wade are two of the main ones. And I think Jason also gets into a rhythm of taking bad shots because he wants to prove that he can cook whoever's in front of him, especially when it comes to the Cavs. Jalen doesn't really do that as much. He's more of I'm going to get into the paint, get to my mid-range, and then if I can create space on the perimeter, I'm going to get my shots up from there as well. And he's getting to the rim more, which I think is extremely important. Jason is more so creating from the exterior, from the outside and the perimeter. But I think Jalen is the guy that, because he's not 6'8", 6'9", the Cavs are like, oh, we have to put a smaller wing on him. We have to put an Isaac Okoro on him. Maybe we'll put Donovan Mitchell on him. That's not necessarily a fair matchup for them because we know that Jaylen Brown is someone who can attack almost anybody. And when it comes to the size matchups, it's difficult. So again, this is why the Cavs have acquired multiple different defensive wings that are 6'6", 6'6", or 6'5", 6'6", 6'7", with wingspans getting close to 7 feet because they know that even if he's smaller, Jalen is still a guy that they have to put on a wing on so they don't have too many big guys on the floor and mess up their offensive flow. So I think all of these things, Javonte Green might see minutes to face up against Jaylen Brown. That's something that we could see just for a defensive fulcrum. When we talk about Isaac Okoro, he could see minutes in that as well, in that series, because we've seen Kenny Atkinson use different lineups, seen Kenny Atkinson use different players for specific roles throughout games, and matchups are dependent on these decisions. And I think that's an area where if Jaylen Brown is getting off and cooking and figuring out how to get by Donovan and Max Strus and all these guys, I think you could see some of the role players come off the bench at that point to see who is the best matchup for Jaylen Brown. Jason Tatum, I think the Cavs feel like they have a better understanding of who could be the secret weapon to guarding him. And I think, as we've seen in the past, it's been Dean Wade, and they're hoping it's going to be DeAndre Hunter this season.
Yes. And, when you look at these two teams and the Stars, they are who they are. They stand out for all obvious and not so obvious reasons. But often we find that these playoff series, there's a pivotal moment, a turning point, a game-changing incident of some sorts that usually involves a backup, someone who doesn't play major minutes. Who is the backup that Cleveland will be turning to? Is it Jerome? Is it Hunter? Which of those two you think will make a bigger impact on a playoff series against Boston?
I think it's got to be DeAndre, right? Because of size, because he's 6'8", because he can guard. As we mentioned earlier into the podcast, I think he's the guy that the Cavs went out and got for this series, for the Boston Celtics, and because he can not only wall up defensively and hold Jason Tatum to hopefully what he's able to do, but he's also able to create his own and get at least space him out, right? If you put Isaac Okoro on the floor, the Boston Celtics are known to just put Al Horford on him and leave him alone. Right. Dean Wade, kind of the same way. But if you put DeAndre Hunter on the floor, he's more known for making these shots. He's more known for having playoff success and also just success in bigger moments in general. We know back to Virginia when they won a championship alongside Ty Jerome. I think DeAndre Hunter is the guy that would be the X factor off the bench. But don't sleep on Ty Jerome, right? Because, again, if Darius Garland gets into trouble, if Darius Garland isn't playing as good as we want him or need him to do for the Cavs to pull out this series, don't think that Kenny Atkinson won't pull the lead and say, Ty Jerome, go see if you can get some on your own, because I think those are the two guys that will have to have the biggest impact. Obviously, Dean Wade would be my third option for that because of his defensive prowess. But Ty Jerome and DeAndre Hunter were not here last year in that series, and I think it's going to be a big factor in how this series could be different than last.
Yeah, I mean, I would go with Ty just because he's just so damn tough. And he got swag, and it's like he's got that swag that you don't necessarily want to acknowledge, but you can't help but acknowledge because it's so real and it's so consistent. And again, there just aren't a lot of players that exude that who aren't in that LeBron James, Luka Doncic, Jason Tatum, Joel Embiid, guys who are just solid NBA players with major swag, like Jerome. That's you really can't go wrong with guys like that, particularly when you start getting closer to the end where every possession matters. Every little edge you can create, whether it's real or unreal, it matters. I just think he's going to have a very important series for Cleveland, good or bad. Because if he's struggling, that's a major blow to them. And if he's playing well, which he's done most of the season, again, major plus. So. Well, Ethan, this has been really good, brother. This has been really good. Now, Ethan, for people who want to check out your work, what's the best place they can go to find some of your musings in basketball?
So I cover the Cleveland Cavaliers as a beat reporter for Cleveland.com and the Plain Dealer. So Cleveland.com/Cavs. You can find all our work there on a daily basis. I'm also the podcast host for Wine and Gold Talk Podcast. That's on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Wherever you get your podcasts, you can find it. And we do 5 days a week podcast, so you can listen in on everything that we have to say about the Cavs and all the players, and especially going into the playoffs. And obviously, when we have a little bit of a lull in the season, there'll be more content for you there with interviews and things like that. But also, if you want to find me on social media, I'm at EJ Elite 1 on X, formerly Twitter, Blue Sky, Instagram, wherever you find your social media content for beat reporters, that's where we're at. And I'll have daily content, live information for games, and also just stats that you won't find everywhere else.
Ethan is all over the map. That's what I'm talking about, young fella. This is what we talking about. This is what we talking about. Put yourself anywhere and everywhere because you never know who's watching. You never know who needs that Cavalier fix because you know how it is. I mean, when you're covering a team that is playing really well, it's amazing how thick that bandwagon starts to feel. It's amazing how the wheels get a little wobbly because you got a lot of weight on the bandwagon at that point. And rest assured, you better believe folks are jumping on that Cleveland bandwagon now, particularly the fact that they were able to make it through the season, maintain that top spot, and for the most part look ready to roll health-wise and comfort-wise, other than Donovan Mitchell, which again, I don't just like you either. I don't think it's a major thing, but anything that can slow down your best player, you got to take your pause for a minute and just make sure things are going to be okay. I think they will be. There's plenty of time between now and the end of the season, and once you get that number one spot locked down, it's just a matter of let's go. Let's just go. Make sure when you go, you're ready to enroll and you got all your guys who are healthy. So before we get out of here, again, just want to give one more shout out to our good friends at Prize Picks, which is the exclusive daily fantasy partner of CLNS Media Network. And also another shout out to our good friends at Game Time, which is where you can create an account and use code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. For Ethan Sands, this is Sherrod Blakely, and this is the Big Three NBA Podcast. We out.